Meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. Connor, would you like to introduce?
Give me 1 second. I just have to wait for it to finish loading on my end. Obviously, with Facebook, we get a 20-second delay, but with YouTube, I don't seem to get that. I also have to mute the site so I don't get reverb.
Does your eyeshadow match your shirt?
Does indeed, yeah.
That's forward thinking.
I know, right?
I'm gonna put an orange bag in the background.
So I've spotlighted myself. I will officially start this. Apologies for the delay, everyone. We had a bit of a hold up with Facebook, which is not super handy when you rely on Facebook as your broadcasting platform. So we are here on YouTube now. So this is a conversation between myself, Connor Sansby, Alex Vellis and Alex Gretton. We are the senior production team behind WinchesterFest. We all produce events outside of this. We've all got festival experiences. We've done quite a lot within the scope of producer. So we thought we were the best eggs to talk about what a producer is. It's a term used in the industry, but not so much outside of it. But that means that a lot of people think that it's a needlessly complex term, but it's actually relatively straightforward. To me, it comes from the same kind of terminology as producer for music, which used to mean that it was the person who put everything together. So a producer wasn't necessarily like a beat maker, which is what a lot of people think of it now. It was someone who booked the session musicians, sorted out the studio, and kind of handled that day-to-day running of things. So to me, a producer is someone who handles the back end of an event. There's a lot that goes on that you don't necessarily see up on stage, things like technical requirements, booking talent, marketing, financial administration. These aren't the big sexy cool things, but they are the things that need to get done to make the events better, to make them run really well. So if I sort of open this up, I will start with Alex, just because he's in order on my screen, and he will talk about what he thinks a producer is.
Cool. So hi, my name is Alex Vellis. I am a producer for WinchesterFest, for Lickety Spits. I used to produce Your Bars. I was an assistant producer for the Wise Words Festival, an outreach worker who also produces events for the Margate Bookie. I have produced events all over, all over Kent, a couple of gigs outside of Kent, and a few gigs internationally. For me, a producer it's really the core of what you want your event to be or what you want your festival to be. So if we talk specifically about producing events to begin with, because they're quite key differences. So there's quite key differences between producing events and producing festivals. Much like Connor already said about with things like producing music, you get different things within that same realm. So when producing events, it is your job to not only liaise with the artists and liaise with the venues, but it is also your job to figure out how everything works. So you are a puzzle maker. You take the existing pieces that exist, that simply are in the ether, if you like, and you fit them together until they form an image of something that you want it to look like. So, you're a designer, you're an artist, however you want to phrase that. Yes, so you liaise with the venue, you liaise with the artist, you liaise with your tech guys, you find your audience, you develop relationships with all of these people, and then from that, you start piecing together the idea of what you want your event to look like or what shape you want it to take. So the easiest thing, obviously, is to start with a venue and say, "Hi, I've got this idea. I want to put on this event." And if they like your event, or they like the idea of your event, then they're all for it. And then you obviously speak to your artists and you speak to your tech, and you steadily start piecing something together. Now, the reason that's different to a festival producer is because even though there's a lot of these same elements, you start looking everything in a more it's more grandiose. There's a lot more grandeur in creating a festival, because not only are you excuse me, not only are you doing these individual events, but you're forming them in such a way in which they have this cohesive bond within the actual festival itself. So instead of doing a 2-hour gig, which is, let's be honest, a 2-hour gig or something is difficult enough as a producer to try and get all of your artists and get everybody paid and get everything running smoothly. But then you've got to do that over several days with loads of different events, all reaching out to different audiences or audienceships rather. So it's a really tricky thing trying to nail down exactly what it is a producer does, because in a wide variety, in a wide idea, they kind of do a little bit of everything. So you might have a marketing team that does your marketing, obviously, and then you'll have your social media marketing team, which will be a subset of your marketing team. Now, as a producer, it's your job, or as a lead producer, if you like, there's different levels of producer within various different things. That's why you get obviously lead producers, co-producers, assistant producers, assistant co-producers, junior producers, so on and so forth. There's like a million terms, and it all depends on how much work you do within the idea of producing. Kind of forgot where I was going to go with that, if I'm completely honest. I went off on a bit of a tangent and lost myself. Was anyone listening enough, Connor or Alice, to point me back in the right direction? Not promising, not promising. The silence was
your last thing was a little bit of everything, and you might have different teams doing things.
Oh yeah, marketing. So yes, so your job as a producer within that scope, when working with your marketing team, is to give them a little bit of brand direction, whilst also pulling back and making sure that obviously you trust your marketing team, they know what they're doing. So you pull back a little bit and you just sort of like guide them in the right direction. So you sort of just say, there's a lighthouse over there. That's where we want to get to. Can you please find us the path? And they'll scout it out and work it out for you. And then the same thing with like when working with multiple venues, you say, this is we want to get to the ocean, and you're the only people with boats. So how many people can we fit in a boat? What sort of tech can we bring on this boat? Because that is a big thing. And then you sort of like, work with all these different teams and guide them together until you have this something that resembles the idea that you had in your head to begin with. Does this all make sense? I feel like I've just sort of like said an awful lot of words quite quickly. So,
yeah, I really like your analogy of being a puzzle maker. I think producing is the creative application of administrative skills.
That's a way more professional way of phrasing that. I quite like it, actually. You can tell that my job essentially as a producer is, we were talking about this earlier actually, but my job essentially, as well as Connor's, as well as Alice's, is that we are specifically creative producers, which means that obviously we are creative within our roles. Because if you were to go on like I don't know, Indeed right now and search the word producer, you will find a million different jobs that come up. Probably not in Kent, if I'm honest, but yeah, you will find like a million different jobs that come up, and all of them have wildly different ideas of what a producer is. So when we say things like creative producer, we mean people that make events, make festivals, run talks, run workshops, and generally work within the creative sphere within the industry. I think that covers me for
yeah. There is a lot to it. Alice, did you want to talk about what you consider as a producer?
Yeah, sure. Hello. So I'm Alice. I am co-producer in WinchesterFest. I was assistant producer for Wise Words. I've done workshop facilitating, which is similar, but it's not the same. But it kind of gave me the ground. So I started doing workshop facilitating, put quite a few workshops on, such as City Sound Project. Did some stuff there. I did some stuff for Philharmonic Orchestra. And then out of that, started doing more producing. So I'm an event producer as well. I do Spark. I do Spark. I love it so much. I forgot its name. Spark is my my love child. I've been doing it for 1.5 years now, and it's at my residency, which is the Mooring. So I think the most important thing that I've learned as a producer is to just think like 5 steps ahead. So you kind of don't go every day, like for a festival especially, you don't go, okay, today we've got this. Like 5 days before, you go, okay, on Friday we've got this. And then obviously that prepares you for like any changes that come. So like you will have artists that drop out, you will have illnesses, you will have like, I don't know, like chaos like we've had with the stream, we've had tech problems. We'll then be pushing this outside of that because we preempt that that could be a problem. So we then have plans for what we can do beyond that. So it's all about thinking, what can we do next before the problem happens? So yeah, that's like the biggest thing that a producer is like there for, is to look at things, go, right, this is what's going to go right, this is what could go wrong, how are we going to handle it? And then it's kind of an umbrella to be a producer. You do everything, but you do it like watching other people, like kind of like I can see them as raindrops. You have the artists, you have the, like, in different fields you have directors, but in this you have like what are the words I'm trying to say? You take care of everybody. So anybody that's doing your marketing, doing your actual performing, the event, like venue holders, everybody is looking at you and saying, what do we do? Where do we go? And you're kind of just like shooting them off in different directions. And so you have to be warm and you have to be comfortable to take on those problems. You have to be acknowledging of things that different people are dealing with. So with artists, you need to be aware of their situations and how you can fit them into other things. You just have to be comfortable enough to make them comfortable, because you need to be this inviting face that they come to, they email, they reach out to about whatever they need. Yeah, so it's like communicating is the biggest thing a producer will be famed for, will be needing. It's like you have to, it's ironic that I say that and I can't get words out, but you have to be able to make these connections with people. You have to be able to market what you're doing and how you're working, because if you have a vision for something really cool, like an event like Spark, I was lucky enough that I was already a resident at the Mooring, so I had that space. But if I were to then push Spark to travel, or I'd have to reach out to people and say, hey, can you please take me on? Like, can we carry this further? I need to be inviting. I need to be reassuring. I need to offer everything and, like, I don't know, kind of reach out for those things, because they can fall in your lap and it is really, really cool when they do. Like, I've had loads of opportunities that have just landed on me and I've been so lucky for them. But pushing the boat out and seeing how far you can like cast it is the most important thing, because you will get loads of rejection. You will get loads of like funding will fall through and loads of like, it will happen. But the more that you push yourself to go out for those things, the more likely someone's going to reach back and like grab onto you, and then you will go forward. And then once you've started to go forward in your productions, then more people notice that you've gone forward, and then it has this snowball effect of you tried and now we're paying attention to you. You've got like what you do with it. It's also about being a supplier to the people that you're taking care of. So as much as you can ask them to do work, you also have to sort of give work back. It's like this give and take relationship. Producer isn't just someone going, you do that, you do this, you do, it isn't that at all. It's you offer something to somebody and you have this platform that you're offering them that's going to be productive for the work that they want to do, because they want to come and they want to make their art, or they want to be an editor, or they want to like produce with you, and you are gaining something from that in your own experience, because you're able to do the production side of it, you're able to like go forward with the work that you want to create. So it's kind of making sure that you know that there's no boss in my head. Like when I'm producing, there's no boss. I am here to manage and take care of you, but you are here to tell me what you need as well. There's like, it has to be a back and forth with people that you're working with. Yeah, so I think being inviting, thinking ahead, being like communicative, being warm and loving, and just knowing what you want to do and being firm in what you want to do, and also being lenient in what other people will want to do out of that, and mold it and shape it into the art that it can be. Just being this wonderful umbrella is how I see a producer.
Yeah, I did like the raindrops bit.
Raindrop humans.
So obviously I'm Connor. I suppose I should talk about the projects that I've done. I'm a producer for the Margate Bookie Festival. I am producer of Tongue Punch, which is a Sabaton-nominated poetry night at the Tom Thumb Theatre. I've run events elsewhere as well. I've worked for a few festivals, Fashion Lit Fest being one of them. Recent work with Power of Women Festival in Thanet. I went down the producer route because of my background in retail management, so I'm quite good at directing a team. As Alex and Alice have pointed out, it's a lot of moving parts that go behind an event. As soon as I started talking, I got an instant sore throat. Yeah, it's about manipulating the components that are available to you in order to get the best event. I really wanted to get involved in that the discussion that Alice had raised there about the necessity for dialogue, because that's not actually how I see it. I think there's a danger there with unhealthy production practice. So it's something I've experienced a lot. I used to really believe in the nurturing aspect of a producer. Obviously, you're not there to be a dickhead and throw your weight around and yell at everyone. But there's a danger that if you become too open and too supportive, people will take advantage of that. Because you're put in the role of a producer as someone with a nice wide set of skills who can do a lot of things really well. Especially within the poetry world, a lot of people see that as a stepping stone to other things. And they downplay the role of the producer and up the role of the artist, or the host, or it becomes a very complex thing. I do like non-hierarchical systems, but I think the producer sits at the center of the web. I think it's also worth us talking about. So we're talking about the idea of like different levels of producer. Above everything we've discussed is like an executive producer, who is someone who's not necessarily involved in the event, but monitors the event, or employs the producer to do the event. And I think that's really important in festival production as well. You'll get producers who aren't necessarily directly tied to the individual event. So for example, with the Margate Bookie, I'm producer for the Bookie Slam. And then above me would be Andreas, who's the festival producer. With Wise Words, there's Beth Gwenko, who's the festival producer there. And they'd be executive producers who are not just responsible for making sure the events come off, but they're responsible for managing the production team that comes behind that. So for example, with WinchesterFest, we don't have an executive producer because we're all experienced producers who can all get on with what we're doing. But if this was like a physical one, we'd need someone who was responsible for things like the insurance and safeguarding and sorry.
It's also things like the producer that's in the executive producer would oversee the physical installation of the festival, for example.
Potentially, I don't think that's necessarily has to.
Oh no, they don't have to. But yeah, sorry. Yeah, they don't have to. But I feel that with an executive producer is the one that I know you said that like you don't like hierarchical things. But if we look at it like a tree, your executive producer is the one that sort of hovers somewhere around the top of the leaves that can therefore see everything and sees things as the larger picture that it is, and help guide things in that direction, or in the direction to make sure that you don't end up with like a branch sticking all the way out and having no leaves on one side. Do you know?
Well, yeah, that's what I mean by they're responsible for the production team.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a moving part system. For example, when I do production work, I'm a big believer in the safeguarding aspect that comes in there, which I don't think is always fully appreciated. That technically your producer should be your safeguarding lead. It should be your point of contact for any interpersonal issues that come up, and it's not necessarily about being nurturing, but it's about having those relationships with people. There are definitely people that I work with who don't like me, but they respect me. Fortunately, I'm a big white guy, so I can get away with that kind of thing. Alex just popped on the screen to wave at that remark. So when I was in retail management, I had this idea that the point of a manager is to render themselves completely obsolete. I'd love to believe that the point of a producer is to render the event so capable of running under its own steam that the producer is no longer needed to play an active role. But it takes an immense amount of work to get to that point. You know, I think as well, because events are a more evolving thing, you don't necessarily end up training people where you do in management. We've kind of skipped over onto a point actually where we were talking about what the different kinds of producers are. Do we want to have a bit of a chat about that?
Yeah, sure.
Let me switch to speaker view.
Cool.
So obviously you have junior producers, assistant producers, co-producers, lead producers, executive producers. How do you feel about people outside of the production hierarchy claiming the roles of producers?
Personally, for me, I hate that. I really like. There's so much work that goes into producing anything, and often the producer is like the unsung hero. And I'm not saying that like as producers people have to sing our praises or anything like that. No, of course not. I mean, like, the artists and the hosts are the visual focal point of any event. Of course they are. Like that's their job. That's their role. That's what they do. But I really, really dislike it when someone comes in and like, I'll tell you what, actually, what I really dislike is when someone comes in and it just presumes that because you've run an event so smoothly that it must be easy to do. That is something that it's like, no, this has taken so many hours of my life. I have been working on this for months and months. So if it ran smoothly, wicked. I love that. Like that's great. It's like it's almost really, really positive feedback that like
it's like ducks.
Pardon?
It's like ducks. On the surface they look calm, but underwater their legs are paddling furiously.
Or icebergs. On the
There's much
surface,
more under the surface.
They're icebergs, and underneath, man, are they much bigger? Icebergs are big. I did not realise that until I saw a picture of one. Huge.
They are massive.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I was going off on a tangent again. Yeah, so I really, really like it when people are just like, oh, that's so good. Like it went so well, we really enjoyed it, everybody's loved it. And then like a week later, you see someone doing like an almost identical copy of what you've done. You're just like, you're going to knock out the thing that we've produced or I've produced or whatever that's taken me literally 6 months, and you're going to do it in the space of 2 weeks. And it kind of feels almost as if someone's saying like, oh well, they did it, so anyone can do it. And the weird thing is, in a lot of ways, that is true. Of course, it's true. Like, if I can do something, anyone can do something. That's a fact. But the difference is, we're putting in the effort beforehand. So like, for example, things like audience development plans, which are mind-numbingly boring. Like, they are the least fun thing to do in the world, and they take like 5 hours each. Do you know what I mean? And even when you do one, the next one that you do is going to be, even if it's remarkably similar, it's probably still going to be different. So you're still going to have to spend another 5 hours doing the same thing for a different festival, for a different gig. And it's just like, it is so boring. But then when you start utilizing that audience development plan, you see how much easier all of your marketing comes together. You see how much easier it is for your specific like targeted marketing, which is something that we don't really discuss that much as producers. But when you're producing something small, like I say small, like WinchesterFest, but like it's entirely online, so we don't need to speak to venues. Do you know what I mean? We can contact essentially almost all of our artists. We can do it via Facebook. So we're cutting out lots and lots of steps that we would usually have to go through, and doing it in a really simplified sort of way. But I did that tangent thing again. I've got to stop forgetting where I'm going. It's why I write things down, or at least why I should write things down. Someone help. Okay. So
sorry, I was just reading through some of the comments that we've got on YouTube.
Okay. So yeah, like I was saying though, it's anyone can do anything that they put their mind to, but they've got to be willing to put the legwork in first. So when someone else comes along and says, "Oh yeah, well it's cool. I'll just do the same thing you did," and it's just like, okay, that's fine, but it's going to take you a really, really long time. And I think you really need to appreciate how much work actually goes into these sorts of things. And
Yeah.
the problem is when someone does a gig, occasionally you'll get a success out of it and you're just like, well done. I'm actually, I'm really happy for you. And then most of the time though, like 90% of the time, someone will put a gig being like, oh, but I did all the same things that you did. And it's just like, no, you didn't.
You can't copy paste an event and expect it to work. For example, running the Bookie Slam, obviously I run it in Margate, and I know my audience really well there. I've got all the community relations, and then we run it as part of Faversham Literary Festival as well. So we're taking the same model, but appealing to a completely different demographic, because Margate is a notable art town with an emerging young population who are directly employed in the arts quite a lot, whereas Faversham is older. There's a different class situation going on, and the marketing becomes very different. So, for example, I will use a social media-led strategy for Margate, but I will use a physical media-led strategy for Faversham.
Can I ask something quickly?
Yeah.
Do you feel that, like, I remembered where I was going, and now it can be a question, basically. Do you feel that because of the essentially low-level version of essentially producing that we're doing, because we managed to skip so many of these steps via it being online. We do all of our marketing ourselves. We do it in-house. And our marketing team is made up of, there's 5 producers, and we also mostly cover marketing as well. So when working on like larger things, do you think that there's a distance between the producer and the idea of marketing? So if you allow me to explain that in a slightly different way that is a little bit more, just better, it's just a better way of phrasing it basically. But so, for example, the people that do the marketing for, say, like the Times newspaper, like they know all their audiences, that none of them are journalists.
No.
The people that do the marketing for the Marlow Theatre, none of them are actors, probably. The people that do the marketing for, even for like festivals like Boomtown, for example, they're not going to be the same people that are doing the physical infrastructure, or the people that are doing the planning permission, or the people that are doing the booking of acts. So do you think there's because we're small, we're taking on many, many more roles as producers that aren't actually covered by the producer, the bracket of producer?
I think when we perform, we step outside of the role of producer.
Definitely.
But I think because the term producer is so broad, like, for example, if you don't have a marketing team, then, that's the producer's job. If you don't have a door person, I would say that becomes the producer's job.
Yeah.
The producer is kind of where the buck stops, I think, in a lot of situations. Something I've noted in the world of poetry, actually, is that there tends to be very few people who are involved in poetry as an industry in that kind of like business administrative sense who aren't also poets.
Well, I feel it's that's because, and Alice, feel free to like interject at any point.
Yeah.
If you because I realised like Connor and I are talking quite a lot, and that's probably quite rude of us. But oh, thank you. Yeah, I think within the art industry specifically, or actually, I think within poetry specifically, if you want to make it even a tighter niche, is that nobody knows their audience better necessarily than poets, because poetry is not, obviously it's a worldwide thing, but it's not like poetry events aren't. You're not booking out Brixton Academy with a poetry event. Do you know what I mean? You're not booking out. I don't know anything. Alexandra Palace in London. You're not booking out these sorts of venues in the same way that you would do with say music, or you're not going to, if you run a pure poetry festival, you have definitely cut down on the size of your audience.
Well, John Cooper Clarke packs out those kind of venues.
John Cooper Clarke is
Andrea Gibson, same kind of thing.
Maybe it's specifically at our level then.
Yeah.
Also, I don't think either of those. I don't think I have ever heard of John Cooper Clarke or Andrea Gibson filling out like, and not even standing remotely like to capacity, something like Brixton. Not in the UK.
Dr. John Cooper Clarke came to the Marlow and he packed out, and we're a 1,200 seater. So.
Oh, that's pretty massive, actually.
And then Andrea, they did a show. Was it a church, like a really big church in London? Yeah, that's been made into a theatre space, and that was packed. That was really big. What's
Brixton's? I don't know what Brixton Academy's capacity is, but I know that Ali Pali is like 10,000 or something like that. And that's by the way. Now that I was thinking about it, that's what I mean by like a big gig, like a big venue. Because, I think if you're under, I don't know, 2,000, 2,500, then it still feels quite like a small venue, still quite local. So, like, for example, I saw Taking Back Sunday, who I love. I saw Taking Back Sunday in, what was the first time I saw them? I can't remember. But it was like a 3,000 venue, and it was like you could not get in if you weren't going in. And then I saw them again at like a 900 venue. And it's the same sort of thing. But like, I would say that the second time that I saw them, it didn't feel like a big gig, even though, there's nearly 1,000 people like surrounding me, but it still feels relatively intimate. And I think that's because it's basically, as soon as you can see all of the exits at any given point in time, it doesn't feel like a big gig. Does that make sense? Like, yeah, and I'm not meaning to try and obviously I would never try and mock the Marlowe's capacity. Like, that stage is massive, and standing on it is intimidating as all hell, particularly as a poet. Can you imagine? It's like I've only had to do it like a handful of times in my life. In fact, never even since it's been the new Marlowe. After that redevelopment 6 years ago, maybe. But yeah,
8 years now.
Sorry, go on.
8 years now.
Yeah, 8 years ago. As an individual person, any stage feels massive when you're looking out over that sort of crowd of people. But I think there's definitely something to be said about how musicians can pack out when was the last time you saw a poet perform to 100,000 people? Do you know what I mean? Like, as an individual.
Yeah. We are a smaller, we
Yeah,
are a more niche form of art, because I find it confusing because poetry is in everything. You have poetry in like adverts for Nationwide, and you have poetry in like all forms. Like, it's thrown in casually in TV shows, like, oh, that was quite poetic, oh, you're going to read me a poem, like. And I don't know, it's part of common culture, common art culture, and just a form of expression. But yeah, as you say, like, when it comes to actually producing shows for poetry, you won't get that many people who are willing to sit down for an hour and a half and listen to somebody talk, because they either see it as boring or they see it as mundane. I've been at production meetings before, when I was meant to be producing a show for a Pride, and I was sat with the venue runner, and he turned to me and he said, I just feel like it'll be really boring if I have a poetry show at my venue. And I said, thank you very much. And I left. And I haven't spoken to him since. And I'm pretty sure he did some kind of BDSM show since. So, that's the kind of shenanigans he was looking for, and I wasn't it. And that's okay, because sometimes you'll find that, people don't want poetry, and that's all right. But for the people that do, our production teams are slightly smaller. We do more intimate work because we are appealing to a less vast audience. So I think that the work that we do is placed on fewer people. Like, there's only 5 of us, but we could have reach of thousands. Like, it doesn't matter, because we know what we're getting ourselves into.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you think personally that the reason poetry is viewed as being, you can't have a poet for an hour and a half because that would be boring? Do you reckon that's because of the traditional idea of, white older patriarchal poets, and that we can't seem to lose that stigma?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let Alice go.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. It's taken a while, but when I was younger, if you said poet, in my head I would have that vision of like a white middle-aged to elderly male reading A-B kind of structure poetry, very traditional, and I would kind of be like, I'm not really, and like, what I want to point out is there is nothing wrong with those kinds of poets, and they have their own audience, and they can be wonderful. I know quite a few that are of the similar capacity, and I do love them, and I've produced work of theirs before. But yeah, I do think that there is a stereotype when it comes to poetry, that when you just say poetry, a lot of people do just glaze over about what and who that could possibly be. And as much as like nowadays we are fighting that, like, I know more queer poets than straight. Like, I know a lot more, arguably I know more female poets than male. Like, it's changing. But yeah, there is a stereotype.
I think that the stereotype doesn't necessarily come from the industry. I think what's happened is there's people who define poetry by what they were taught in schools, which is not taught to you because of how it emotionally connects, which is the point of poetry, but rather we're showing those kinds of poetry for specific techniques, like, for example, rhyme structures or form. We're not showing them because of necessarily the outright quality of the piece. Not saying we don't get shown quality poems, but that's not what they're being shown for. They're being shown for a different reason. So we end up distancing us as a society, distancing ourselves from poetry because that's what we were shown. Whereas if you said music, because there's this whole mainstream culture of music that exists outside of like an educational paradigm, we don't go in and go, all music is 12-bar blues that's played on the piano out of time. I hate music. Like, it would be ridiculous for people to say they hate music. Apparently Hugh Grant, though, doesn't like music. Weirdo. Yeah, I know, sidetrack. But with poetry, we have some people who very tightly cling to that academic, this is what poetry is, and they resent the people who aren't of that style. And then you have people within the alternative who resent the people who are from the academic tradition. And I think poetry's internal struggle between those two things is actually really what's doing it more than the lineage of straight white poets. And I think we're starting to, well, we have been talking about more diverse acts for a good, like at this point, 30 years. What's not working is the way that we teach poetry and the way that we present poetry. I think we lock ourselves into this underground thing, but without necessarily the culture of. John Waters, director, spoke about what is he said there's no subcultures anymore. If you were part of Anonymous, what's the dress code? There's nothing more to it. And you know, what's the culture of poetry outside of the events? What happens wider than that? What's the dress sense of a poet? What are the food preferences of a poet? What, you know, these kinds of things aren't often spoken about, because as producers we really should be dealing with these kind of like wide things as well, but we spend so much time desperately trying to convince people on this level that poetry is this really cool fun thing, and it's not you know, straight dead white guys.
It's always that constant battle between the idea of you know, what is a poet in the first place, which is you were saying for the last like 30 years or so, which I would agree with. This discussion has raged forwards, and it's from the idea of the spoken word artist, and whether or not that is a term given to ourselves as I'm going to say young and new poets, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But versus the purist. So was it the purist that gave us that word so that we'd be a separate entity to poets? Or is it the idea that we have named and branded ourselves as something with a non-identical lineage to, you know, to the purist poets in the first place? And which is definitely an interesting discussion for another time. But yeah, so I think like from the role of a producer, trying to figure out who it is, what we are, and what we are actually going to do, is actually an incredibly difficult and interesting, and albeit you know, what's the word? Interesting, difficult, and I'm going to say challenging, but I don't mean it as the same as difficult. It's challenging, but in a productive way.
Yeah, it's a very stimulating thing. So D. Dickens has just pointed out in the chat something that I thought was very interesting. Obviously, there's things like Unislam, which is academics doing performance poetry. I mean, really, this is more Alice and Alex's wheelhouse. Alex is an academic from a slam background, and Alice is a uni slammer.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, this isn't poetry related. I have this weird tendency when I get distracted to start YMCAing, and I don't know why, but that was what was happening. You caught me in the middle of BM. So.
You know why it is.
I thought it was like
it's your inner queer person channeling the village people.
Yeah.
At all times.
At all times. Please never stop.
I think. Sorry, can I say something if that's right? Thank you. So I think Unislam is an interesting one. Obviously, I've never been myself. I only went to uni for like a year. Hang on, that sounds like I didn't do a course. I did an MA. It took a year, right? Anyway, so I think it's interesting because if you were to speak to those that consider themselves academics, like purist academics, a lot of them don't see slam poetry as poetry in the first place. You know what I mean? So you end up with this this idea of like a Unislam being slam poetry by academics, but then if you look at purist academics, they don't see slam poetry as an academic feat at all, or spoken word rather, not specifically slam poetry. So as much as I agree as it is, you know, academic slam poetry, a lot of academics disagree with that. So because it's in an academic setting, does it still count as being academic poetry? Because slam poetry is prolific within universities across the UK. And as it is becoming more prolific in secondary schools and primary schools to a certain extent, and obviously colleges. But just because we put something non-academic in an academic setting, does that therefore make it academic? So like, would you say that graffiti, for example, if you put it in a school or in a university, does that therefore make it an academic pursuit?
Basquiat.
What?
Basquiat. Basquiat was a graffiti artist who is now studied within the traditional academic lineage.
But that's one example.
That's one very notable example. Alternatives, Banksy, Black Claret. These are artists that started out in a street capacity. Shepard Fairey.
But would you say that now that the artistic idea of graffiti is now an academic pursuit?
I would say
study these artists in an academic setting. Does that therefore make the whole thing academic?
No, and I would say that studying poetry in an academic sense doesn't make poetry academic. Academia is, in this sense, is the analysis of culture, and culture is much broader than academia.
So how can you repeat that in a slightly different way? I'm not sure I understood.
If an academic studies music,
mm-hmm.
that doesn't make all music academia.
Okay.
Just because it's studied by an academic, it doesn't make it academic. In fact, I would argue that academic actually means next to nothing in a realistic thing. You know, the study of something doesn't change it.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that I wasn't trying to shit on Unislam.
No.
Or like slam poetry or spoken word within academic settings. It's just, there's no but there. I'm not doing that. I was just thinking about how, because it's in an academic setting, I don't think, and now that I can see that you agree, I don't think that makes it necessarily academic. I think it's just, that's why you get bedroom poets that are amazing and academic poets that are, to be blunt, fucking awful.
Yeah. And
structure, that doesn't make it good.
I think over the last, I'm going to say 10 years, but that's quite, I don't know if that's right. Academia has started opening up to spoken word a bit more, partially on the insistence of students. But, it is studied in school. For example, Dan Simpson, who show at WinchesterFest, taught was it a module in spoken word performance at CCCU.
We were there.
We were there. Like it's it is opening up. But I think I don't think poetry is led by the academia though.
Interestingly, specifically like dance class as well. But that's the reason that that's being taught in academic settings is because it's being driven forwards by poets that have risen to the point in which they can say, hey, I want to do this in schools, I want to do this in universities, I want to do this even in things like prisons. But obviously prisons where you're learning stuff as well. I don't know if that came out well. Anyway, but so yeah, that's being pushed forwards by the non-conformist idea of an academic, which is obviously the new age ones. Whereas like the traditional, like I was saying, the traditional middle-aged white academic poet, middle-aged white male academic poet, they're not pushing for spoken word. They are not pushing for spoken word in universities. They just want to teach you know, Yeats and Keats and Pound and a litany of other, you know, white dead poets, traditionally white.
Can I make a point?
Of course, yes.
In my degree, I've just been thinking about so I do drama and theatre at UKC, and there's a popular performance course you can take, module, and your assessment is either on a spoken word piece that you've written yourself, or it's on comedy. So those are seen as the two forms of popular performance. So like it is something that, and that's been going since I started 3 years ago. So I don't know, I think I agree that it has been pushed on further, but in such courses as theatre, because I think there's a challenge with spoken word where it comes under the bracket of poetry, but I think personally it should come under the bracket of theatre as well, because it is theatrical. You are a character portraying a story most of the time when you're reading spoken word, and when you're reading slam poetry, you are like, you wouldn't emote and punctuate, and like you wouldn't be that person like at a pub like I am, because I'm flamboyant, but like you wouldn't necessarily do that. And so I think there's an important factor there where we can see spoken word as academic in the sense that it is acting to a certain degree, and it is theatre making, and it is performing, and that is very well recognised as an academic form of art. So yeah, I just thought I'd raise that as a point to think of.
Would you say, what did you say the course was called again? Popular practice?
Popular performance. Popular
performance, thank you. So there's an interesting idea around just the use of the word popular. Mm-hmm. I feel that like from a purist idea that it's being included because it's popular, not because it's of note studying. Does that make sense? And I wonder if, I'm not saying that that's a fact. What I'm saying is like, I'm wondering if that's why. So like, for example, if the popular, so, you know, if let's say for argument's sake, they started doing death metal in nationwide adverts. Yeah. And they started doing like gore grind, you know, on the tube. Like, would that then become, if that was popular enough, would that then become the idea of a popular performance that you could then be marked on, and spoken word would then be put to the side? Because I feel that if it's not given its own, you know, its own dedicated space, instead of, so like, you know, this is spoken word 101. We're doing performance poetry for this this semester, or this, whatever they're called, I can't remember. But and then we're moving on to the idea of movement within poetry itself, or something like that. I don't know what the actual course would be. But without giving it the specific, this is what it is, and putting it under its own heading and its own bracket, do we think that it's only there because they're just like, well, people like it at the moment, so why not? That's something that young people are interested in. We want people to come to our university, so let's do it like this. And I wonder if that's actually why things like this are included. Because, like, for example, you can do a creative writing master's degree, but you can also do a poetry master's degree, which, interestingly, you have to already have a master's degree to do, which I thought was bizarre, but whatever. And the poetry masters is specifically, it's a purist form. It's only written word. You don't, you know, there's no marking on performances or anything like that. And, you know, it's a very clear cut, this is what it is. So I think until the, you know, spoken word gets its own, I know that I think they do it in Bristol actually, a spoken word masters. But I think until it is widely accepted in every university that you can do spoken word as an individual course, it's not going to be recognised by academics as being anything other than a popular pursuit. That's my thoughts on it. Feel free to disagree. We've also sidetracked.
No, I think this is still part of the discussion of understanding poetry in a broad sense as a producer.
Okay, I feel.
So,
Yeah.
for example, I know, I think all of us do. Every spoken word, every poetry event that occurs within Kent, realistically,
Pretty much, yeah.
we know when it's happening roughly and who's running it and kind of who's on the lineup. We understand who is worth booking from outside of the area, who's up and comer, who's hot talent, who's going to be a draw. You know, I think a producer has to consider these kinds of the poetry in the widest sense, and I think part of that's also understanding the cultural perceptions behind it.
Can I ask you a question? You just said who's running the poetry event instead of who's producing it. Do you reckon that's is that a colloquial? Not necessarily colloquial, but is that a term that we've developed? Just like, oh yeah, you run the gig, or because producing and the gig are different things.
I use it more to talk about organisations where I wouldn't necessarily call them producers, and as well events that are realistically not produced but are somewhat informal.
Could you give an example of a non-produced informal event?
No, because that would be the poetry event. But like, for example, if a venue just says, hey, we're going to put on a poetry night, and they just advertise for poets, and then on the night they put up a mic and kind of let whatever happen happens, that's not a produced event.
Yeah, I get it.
If it's just a host who doesn't really do a lot of marketing, but rocks up and says, I'm going to do a poetry night, and then invites 3 of their mates to come and read poems, I wouldn't really consider that a produced event, personally. One of the things that sets us 3 as producers, obviously we also all host gigs, which is a separate role, but we all have considerations for the culture, for the marketing, for the presentation of the events, and the actual construction of the events. We're not just putting on a poetry night, we're putting on a poetry night with a certain culture that's marketed in a certain way, that's administered in a certain way, that has certain financial considerations. So, for example, Alice Spark, there is a clear culture behind that event, which you've obviously thought about. Tongue Punch, same thing. The slams that you ran, the grassroots slams in particular. There was, I didn't say your bard because there was also the slam, the cafe, and there was another one. Sorry?
What's that one in Folkestone called?
The slam in the cafe.
Yeah.
That's the one in Canterbury.
I don't remember.
The word kind, something like that.
Maybe.
Close encounter with the word kind. That was it.
But,
yeah.
But there was a culture that you were trying to foster there that wasn't all tap into. That wasn't just, I'm going to go to that event and host it, and that'll be my thing done.
Yeah, I get you. Like lickety spit.
Yeah, there's loads going on to lickety spit that doesn't just happen on the stage.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to point out when it comes to being a good producer, is that you have to be a good creative as well. Because if you are a producer, you do have to have a specific reason. Like if someone was to look at a program or a list or a schedule or a calendar and it said all of these different poetry nights, why should someone come to you? What makes you worthwhile? What makes you worth taking up that evening that they could be watching Netflix? Like, what makes you worth that time? And that's like, as you say, with Spark, I spent a lot of time coming up with strategies, coming up with different things that I could do. I draw every cover for the pages. I draw every page, and then I put that drawing in the CAF, and I say, can you make notes around, and they make notes on different pages, and then I take their notes and then I produce it again with their notes in mind, and then I do it again, and it just becomes something that like is pulled from everything else. So yes, production, you have to be creative, you have to be on the ball, you have to keep molding and adapting with the world around you, and you can't just kind of rock up and say, I've got a couple mates, they're gonna do that thing. Yeah, it has to have an appeal.
Mm. Go on.
Yeah. No, I was thinking of a particular event.
I just want to clarify that I think the idea of creativity as a producer is integral, but I also think that it's a different sort of creativity to being a poet necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So like we use the blanket term creativity for like so much stuff, but I think the idea of being a visual producer of like say like art or whatever, like drawn art, and being an audio, that sounds like a word, sure that'll do, an audio producer for something like poetry is, they're different types of creativity, and I think that it's important to note that like whilst it is integral to be creative as a producer, as Alice said, I totally agree. It's also important to note that it's a different sort of creativity. You can't have like not floozy, that's not the right word, flaky poets essentially trying to produce an event, because it won't happen, it will fall apart. It doesn't matter how good a writer you are, if you can't structure your time in the way that needs to be structured as it does in creative administration, then you're not going to end up with a gig.
No, but I think what Alice is talking about with that is more in terms of branding.
Yeah, no, I'm not, I wasn't disagreeing. I just wanted to clarify that there's different areas of creative outreach and creative work within the creative industry. Obviously, now that I've said it like that, it sounds so much more obvious. But yeah.
Alice is, oh, there we go.
Okay, there we go.
I think something that we often take for granted is the network of producers that exists throughout Kent. Obviously, we are three of the people who are responsible for producing events. There are, I think we have 40 people who produce events in Kent, and we're all, we consider each other when we book events. We consider what else has gone on, and there tends to be a consideration of the different cultures actually. So, for example, wordsmithery, they won't produce the same kind of event as me, and that's where creativity really comes in. You look like you're thinking, Alice.
Always thinking. Yeah, I know. I agree with you. I was considering your point and processing it, and yes, agree.
You're doing a chin stroke.
If I had a beard, if only I had a beard.
Is that what you were considering? Because I've got to tell you, it really helps me think.
Yeah, I don't have one, and I can't think at all.
Nah.
It's like I've taken my armpit hair to my face.
Oh. So we have been talking for nearly an hour actually about this kind of stuff. Do we want to talk more practicality of like how to produce a gig?
I think that's really down to there's certain ideas that you can follow. There's a structure that you can follow, obviously, but I think quite a lot of that is down to the type of gig that it is and the producer that's producing it. Mm-hmm. So, for example, we all as individuals produce events pretty differently. We all like start at different places. We all do slightly different things. We all have different, although we have like the same overarching target audience for our specific events, we have slightly different audiences.
Yeah.
So I think like if we tried to give some sort of structure, we're going to end up falling over each other saying, oh yeah, but I prefer to do it this way. You know, like when do you remember when you get a job in a call center or something and someone sits you down and goes, and they're just like, oh, can you train them how to do this? And they're just like, yeah, so you do it this way, but I do it this way because it's much, much easier. And we're just going to end up doing that for trying to explain to people. I think realistically, if people want to know more about the actual structure of producing a gig, what they need to do is have a look at one of the gigs that we've produced and then speak to us individually as producers and be like, I like this, how did you do it?
Yeah,
that would be more beneficial.
I think there's the value of interning for a producer, asking to lend a hand and volunteer to help get the event together with the understanding that, you know, this is part of your professional development.
Yeah, I think that's, if you want to learn about stuff, ask people and say, I'll help you out if you can teach me how to do it.
Yeah.
That's how I got going with wise words.
When I got started, I used to count every single person that was in the room, regardless of if it was my gig or not, to learn like how did they get those people in. I started looking at the individual behaviours that went into like how did they attract that person there. They're here for the culture, for the community. They're here because they like poetry. They're here because they want to hear themselves on stage.
They're here because it's cheap drinks night.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I've never counted. I think that one of the interesting things, like when you're on stage, is that you know, if there's 10 people sitting in a room watching you, you can see that there's 10 people. If there's 100 people, you can't tell if there's 50 or 100 people. Do you know what I mean? Like it gets, as the numbers get larger, you stop being able to see how many people are actually there. So like 100 people and like 200 people, or yeah, about 100 people and 200 people look about the same amount of people. Whereas 10 people to 50 people, that is a huge difference. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's, so like I've never counted anyone, but I think I'd be a bit nervous to do that. I'll tell you what, I've counted it when it's like 6 people and I've just been like, well, I've definitely done something wrong here.
Did we want to talk about the difference between hosting and producing, or the separation between the two of them?
Yeah.
I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we all host gigs as part of our extended responsibilities as an event producer. But equally, we've all produced events where we aren't the host.
In fact, I don't really host events at all at the moment. I mean, obviously I do online, but like prior to the lockdown, I stopped hosting so much so I could concentrate more on producing.
I think I find it difficult because as like a creative producer, as you say, I have all of these wonderful ideas and stuff. And when it comes to the actual final product, you want to be up there making sure that they happen in a way. So like if you have these visions for this show and this showcase, and then you're not hosting, you can kind of feel worried that all of the creativity that you've sort of put into it is going to be mistranslated, is going to like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Personally, I want to produce and host as well. But yeah, when it comes to producing other people's work and having a host, what I would do is step back on the creativity slightly. So I would say, right, I'm going to be here for your marketing, here for like organizing, doing that, talking to runners and stuff. But you need to think of how you want this show to look, and there'll be like a conversation there with a host where they have their own input, because you don't want someone to get up on stage and just say, right, I'm here, Alice told me to be, we have 6 poets for you today. Like, you want them to be like, this is what I want to say, I'm so happy to be here with this show. And yeah, there has to be a different creative dialogue there.
Isn't that part of booking a good host though?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Like if someone went up on stage and was like, oh, there's like 6 poets and I don't really want to be, I'd be like, cool, I'm never hiring that person again.
Yeah.
As a host. Like, for example, I wouldn't have any concerns about inviting either of you two to, for example, host Tongue Punch if I was like ill or something. But you understand what the night is. You know, I think there's a lot of people that understand what the night is that I could I could potentially ask. But yeah, it's. I don't like hosting gigs, for example. I don't really like being on stage. I'd be much more comfortable sat on the side of the stage or backstage monitoring things. And partly that's down to the fact that I'm an absolute control freak.
Yeah, me
For
too.
example, this is the 25th day of WinchesterFest, also known as the 25th day that I have been working solidly. Actually, longer than that. I think I might be coming towards the 30th, because we were researching tech as well before we launched. I thought you were celebrating. Oh, right, Alex is YMCAing.
Yeah, no, I was copying Alex. I saw it in the little screen that we have.
But yeah, I really enjoy producing gigs more than I host them, because I like that puzzle solving that goes on beforehand.
It's fun.
To me, a host is the expression of a lot of the things that have gone into producing, and I think that a producer and a host need a good relationship.
Definitely.
But it's the producer's role to express what they're after from the host, and then it's the host's job to convey that.
Yeah, like
Yes.
do you remember when there used to be the Gold Slam up at yeah. So Dan Simpson was hired in as host. He wasn't part of the producing process. I don't think. Don't hold me to that. But yeah, I don't think it was part of the producing process. And but you know that if you give Dan Simpson a job and be like, "Yo, I will give you however much your fee is. Can you come and host something for me?" He'll just be like, "Yeah," and he will kill it every single time, because it's the role of a host to have that like unbridled energy and that passion for whatever it is that your vision is. So it's, I think that's like really important to know, because like I enjoy hosting things, but like, do you remember when I was doing 5 gigs a month every month for like a year?
Yeah.
And by the end of it, my hosting ability was like in the ground, because I was just like, I just don't care. I just want to go to bed. Yeah. But yeah, I think like that's actually one of the reasons I handed the gigs off to other people. So it's just like I've lost all the, not the love for it, but the energy to do this properly. So let's give it to people that can. And that's why, like, you know, you got Chris Marshall, Mic Drop. You got Henry, who does full hosting on Lickety Spit, and Tommy, who does Your Bard. And each one of them, okay, granted, Mic Drop not so much, because like it hasn't actually happened yet since we did the revamp, because goddamn lockdown. But and yes, as soon as you see these producers, or these hosts rather, have that sort of energy for it, the show becomes better. And I think it's like, from a productory point of view, even though I don't produce Your Bard anymore, when you have that energy and you have that vision like solidified from the producer, it becomes easy to like just have someone jump in and fill those hosting shoes for you. Not easy necessarily, but easier.
Yeah, I mean, the people that you handed gigs over to as well were all really good choices to pass those things over to.
Did research.
Yeah. So yeah, we've been talking now for like an hour. Let's wind things up. Any conclusionary points, people?
Alice, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, my conclusion would be a good umbrella.
That's a great
Don't
one.
let the wind take you. Take care of everything that is underneath your umbrella. Make sure that everyone is happy. Just be direct enough that you know what you want, but also warm enough that you know you can listen. And then you'll be good at what you do, producing.
That's nice.
I guess.
Am I next, Connor? Are you closing?
Yeah, you're next.
Okay, cool. If you don't love what you do, don't try and produce events. If you do love what you do, don't try and produce events. You won't love what you do. No, I'm joking. learn it. It's weird because I'm also a control freak. Learn everything it is that you think you can possibly ever need to know about producing, and then ignore quite a lot of it, and then just go to town and be happy in what you do. Just produce it. Basically, just produce an event that you would want to go to. Put in all the amount of effort that you think goes into a successful event, and then double it. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. I would say treat your producers with respect. It's not just a matter of using them as an opportunity to get up on stage, but it's about how the culture of poetry is expressed through the producers. And I think it's a massive part of the community, which is, what I love about poetry. On that note, we will wrap up. I'm so glad I caught that.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, man, so much.
So yeah, we will wind this up. This will be available on Facebook later on today. Please do check out the rest of WinchesterFest. We've got Alex, you're performing tonight, aren't you? It's 7 o'clock.
Yes, I'm totally ready.
I believe you.
Also, to be clarified, tonight is the 14th of April. So in case someone sees this in like 2 days' time.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
Yeah.
April 14th. What have we got in the afternoon as well?
All of my stuff's down at the moment, so I can't see anything.
I will check this.
Yeah.
Is that human? There's a human.
There's definitely a human. They're probably a good egg as well.
Yeah, an egg.
We have. Oh no, we have
my day off, so my brain's switched off.
We have a gap today.
Yeah.
So we are all going to
Nap.
Yeah.
Gap means nap.
Gap means nap.
So true as well. Bravo.
Right.
So basically, do we have anyone on at 8? We don't, do we?
No.
I'm the only next show. So yeah, it's just me until Wednesday. Just Alex Ellis, 100% all the time, every day, 20 years, straight ahead, go right ahead, watch all the time, watching the poetry. I'm doing the poetry, having a good time, reading poetry. Maybe I'll read some of my own. Who knows? We don't know that yet, but we're definitely going to find out later at 7 o'clock, 7 till Wednesday tomorrow, the 15th of April. Congratulations to Alex. And that's...
Bye!
See you guys later.